Well, the UK Parliament is being suspended and will stay that way for the next 5 weeks. It is the latest development in an ongoing scramble by British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to salvage his Brexit plan. Johnson has warned the UK must leave the European Union by October 31st with or without a separation deal. But his political opponents in Parliament have blocked him by passing a law that prohibits Brexit without a divorce deal with the European Union. And they have so far foiled his plan to call an early election over this issue. For more on what it all means and what happens next, we've reached Catherine Barnard, a professor of EU and employment law at Cambridge University. Professor Barnard, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me.
It's a pleasure.
Why has Boris Johnson moved to suspend the UK Parliament for 5 weeks? What does that give him?
Well, the official reason is that he wants to reset the clock. He wants to set his own domestic agenda on health and education, and he needs to prorogue or suspend Parliament in order to be able to invite the Queen back to launch his agenda. Most people think that actually part of that's the justification, but the other part is that he didn't really want Parliament causing more trouble over Brexit and asking more questions over what he was doing over the divorce deal. It was a way of running the clock down to the 31st of October when, as he has said, it's do or die, we shall be leaving the EU.
Okay, why is there such opposition to having the UK withdraw from the EU without an agreement on how that separation will work? What's the concern?
The real concern is the impact on the economy and on jobs. Now, UK government has been devoting a huge amount of resources. We think a best part of 12,000 civil servants have been working on trying to mitigate the consequences of a no-deal Brexit. And they've been putting legislation in place to try and help things on the 1st of November. But it's widely thought that despite the best endeavours of the UK, there's only so much the UK can do on its side of the border. And the reality is that the French government will be checking on goods coming into France. And all of this will cause significant hold-ups at the border. And that will affect the supply of food and, crucially, the supply of medicines. And people are very worried about that. And they're also worried about loss of access to a number of the EU databases on criminal law matters. And so a lot of MPs are very worried about a no-deal Brexit. And that's why this very important bill, which became an act of Parliament this evening, it got royal assent today. And this bill essentially says, unless Boris Johnson comes up with some sort of deal, the UK must ask for an extension to Article 50. So we stay in the EU for another few months until the end of January 2020.
Okay, let's talk about this extension possibility because, as you say, Parliament's passed that law. It's now an act of Parliament that that prevents a no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson has famously said he would die in a ditch before asking the EU for an extension. So what are his options with this law now hanging over his head?
Well, this is a million-dollar question. What can he do? Because he's adamant that he won't be asking for an extension. On the other hand, the law expressly mandates him personally as Prime Minister to do just that act. So what will happen? One possibility is he says, I'm not going to do it. That's what he's been talking about so far. I'm not going to do it, and therefore he'll be taken to court, and it's likely the courts will uphold the order that he should comply with the legislation, and then he'll turn around and say, I had to ask for an extension because Parliament and the courts made me do it. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is even if he asks for an extension, it takes two to tango, and the EU have got to act unanimously to grant that extension. So he goes to one of his friends in, say, Hungary and says, could you block that EU agreement? It only takes one state to block it, and therefore we'll be leaving on the 31st of October with no deal. The other possibility, and the rather odd one, is for him to resign or even call a vote of no confidence in himself. And if he resigns, then that gives the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, a chance to try and form a government. Now, then Jeremy Corbyn would be forced to ask for an extension, and then after that, it's likely to be an election.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot of bouncing balls to follow here. Look into your crystal ball. How do you think this gets resolved?
It's a mug's game to try and make any predictions at all. Who would have thought we would have been where we are at the moment? Who would have thought that Parliament would be prorogued, suspended for 5 weeks? It's the longest period of prorogation or suspension for a very, very long time, just at a time when the UK is going through its biggest crisis since the war. Who would have thought that there would be an act of Parliament telling the executive to do something and the executive saying, no, we're not going to do it.
Right.
I think what's likely to happen is there probably will be an extension of some sort. There'll be an election soon afterwards. Question is, will the election produce a decisive victor? Or, as most people think, it'll be a hung Parliament, and we'll be back in just this situation again in January. You and I might be talking again then.
All right. Catherine Barnard, always good to get your perspective. Thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Good time.